If you were to tell me what we were learning like a few months ago, I think I'll have an ontological shock. Ever wonder why one can be practicing for who knows how long, and shift after shift, this experience, that experience, endlessly dissolving conditionings, with retreats here, psychedelics there, on the spiritual path, yet nothing has fundamentally changed. This video can be viewed as a mandala, various topics interwoven to point out the reasons why we're stuck on a catch-22 loop on the path and in life in general, and new methodologies to rehabituate and redirect your karmic trajectory and purify afflictions that obscure you from truth and liberation. We're in the midst of a 90-day bootcamp. Don't have any human contact aside from like you guys. Topics include reframing the whole paradigm of spirituality, seeing through the ways that we're conditioned by the cult of modernity to flatten reality to the linear causality of if I do this, I'll get that. Always chasing after the next insight to maximize the seeker with more bliss, love, clarity, and serenity. Next level dissolution and abiding to acquire the next spiritual trophy. The newest, fastest way to enlightenment method and technology with endless comparisons of where you're on the path and did so attain Anatta yet. Without realizing all of that are coming from the same ontological container with meaning already baked onto itself in order to sustain and reinforce its own structure. And it's the same matrix that conditions us to stack on material goods, hence spiritual materialism. There's absolutely nothing wrong with spiritual materialism if you see it for what it is. And this way of approaching it can get you pretty far, but if this is the only view that you hold, no matter how many boxes one has checked off on the list of all the ways to measure progress, they're still limited by and confirming the same partial views that got us into this samsaric situation in the first place. Now, views go way deeper than worldviews, ideas, and concepts. They're the geometries of our conscious and subconscious minds, pre-verbal beliefs and underlying assumptions that are so deeply ingrained that they form the entire basis of our existence. Views can be highlighted through triggers, both negative and positive ones, and they go almost completely unexamined even after awakenings. There's a lot of confusions in the internet spirituality scene because everyone is coming from different partial views, which creates echo chambers within different communities. I don't really feel human right now. Feels like I'm accessing sentience of the otherworldly, almost alien-like. Without refining our views and yogic fitness, we can be chasing our own tails endlessly. Other topics include thoughts on money, renunciation, paying homage to afflictions, overcoming existential fears, teleology, and conceit to jump out of the non-dual fishbowl. I think I'm gonna make a video. People love those like top 10 videos. Like top 10 non-dual dogmas, or like 10 ways to stuck on the spiritual path. We just mentioned a bunch of them, and one of them was that Anatta realization is the end, or thinking that non-duality is the end. Oh, no concept. That's a big one. When I mention this to people, they're like, holy shit, you're right. I'm thinking about having no thoughts or conceptualizing about having no concepts. The views stated here are not necessarily right or wrong per se. They're just partial views people tend to cling on to make substantial. The nature of mind is free from all reference points. Non-dual extreme view number 10, I'm not the body and the mind, which can result in people negating their bodies. This view might be useful to break out your total mind-body identification initially, but you can definitely become identified with disidentification. Even out-of-body experiences are embodied. You need the nervous system and its perceptual apparatus. The only way for infinity to know itself is through the finite. We are infinite finite beings. Your true nature is indeed inconceivably expansive and beyond space and time, but it includes your body and mind too. You're not just the body and the mind. Number 9, everything is spontaneous. Holding on to the view that everything is spontaneous and that the best way to live life is to always go with the flow, one could easily bypass and go in circles because the flow state you're experiencing is confined with your own limited stance, paradigm, or meaning-making system. We think we're making progress, but we might be further deluding ourselves and perpetuating the same karmic cycles over and over. Even if you switch trains, say you found a new teaching or a method, and even if it seems to be working, our lives are still unfolding through the same starting condition that got us into this mess in the first place, and we're still reinforcing the same condition becomings, habitual tendencies, and thought patterns. See, without seeing through this self-contained structure, any display and signs of progress can actually be part of the program that was built to reinforce itself. The desire to drink, for example, and the days of your sobriety are both coming from the same karmic trajectory. This is the wheel of samsara. As a snake eating its own tail ad infinitum, we're continuously eating our own karma and spitting it out. And we use the conditionings that we spit out to construct ever more spacious, luminous, and equanimous container, but it's still the same prism or prison of catch-22. So how do we get out of this Stockholm Syndrome situation? I'll attempt to answer this question from different angles throughout the video. First, acknowledge that there is a train track you've been riding on. Those are the causes and conditionings of your habitual trajectories and patterns of becoming. Then we can start making maneuvers and adjustments to take different routings, build new tracks, or switch vehicles and start flying. Papa Sambhava, the Steph Curry of consciousness, said that his view, this ultimate view of no view, or the liberating view, is vaster than the sky, but his attention to karmas and causes and conditionings is as fine as a grain of sand. It's not enough to recognize the nature of mind. One must understand how the mind compounds and compresses phenomena to form karmic tendencies and to obscure your view of reality. This is why afflictions, obscurations, and extreme views go hand in hand to reinforce each other. So purifying conditioning and refining your views are actually two sides of the same coin. Everything is spontaneous is an extreme view. Everything is predetermined, also an extreme view. When in doubt, investigate and go beyond the four extremes. Number 1, being, attachment to existence. This is the view of eternalism, or everything's one. Number 2, non-being, attachment to non-existence. This is the view of nihilism. Oh, I must get rid of the ego. But the craving to not become something is the same as the craving to become something. Clinging is aversion. Number 3, both existence and non-existence. 4, neither existence nor non-existence. If one is liberated from both sides of the extreme, one also transcends the view in the middle. Nagarjuna, the Kobe Bryant of consciousness, said that the view without middle or extreme is the perfect view, and whoever attains this view will attain omniscience. Now you can embody all partial views simultaneously depending on function. Non-dual dogma number 8, concepts are bad. There's also a tendency to vilify the conceptual mind in that, oh, you don't need to read or contemplate anymore just because you see through the emptiness of thoughts. Certain philosophical studies are extremely important in refining views and grounding insights and realizations. If you still hold on to the view that concepts are bad, there's still a duality between concepts and reality. In our Contemplative CrossFit BootCamp, we're learning how to read tantrically with our entire nervous system, body, and being in order to connect our mind streams directly to the masters to receive direct transmission. Reading with your third eye makes the text panoramic and visceral. It turns out you can think without thoughts and will without agency. Oftentimes on the path, we confuse remedies with truth.
We get too caught up with the method that we can't throw away the medicine. Bro, you take the medicine, it's cool. You don't have to think thought that's empty anymore. Just think the thought. But people keep take on medicine. Well, it's empty anyway.
You use a boat to cross a river, and once you cross the river, you put the boat down.
The problem is like when you try to pin realization to like a momentary result that comes from the collapsing of a view. It's just a byproduct of the collapsing of the self view, right? But then if you attribute that to just one cause, say, of Vipassana for 5 years, or attribute that to just one specific effect, like say the perceptual shift, but that's again just one out of the 5 aggregates, and the 5 aggregates isn't just your 5 sense doors, so that's only one aspect of the perceptual aggregate. So then you verify that into the entirety of the path instead of seeing like the greater mandala of the infinite webs of cause and condition that probably stretches to before you were born and after you die. And this is the limitation of a lot of teachings out there, including the things I used to talk about. When a teacher or a tradition makes the expedient the definite, say they turn a specific side effect or remedies or the specific experiences following the realization, like having no thoughts or bliss or equanimity, and then you turn that into the sole benchmark to measure progress, or you build an entire path around that. They just create another view. Oh, my perception is getting more 4K, more 8K, more 360. 2 years later, they're like, oh, I dissolve more, everything's more luminous. But the realization isn't done. I think what's more important than seeing through thoughts or concepts is the sense and meaning-making system that gives rise to these thoughts in the first place. So many people, they practice for years and years. They can scan their bodies for 20 years, going to Gonkai retreats, getting really good at like stopping thoughts and, do the angular kind of inquiry. But then conceptuality is still running. The meaning system is still running in the background. A lot of it is unconscious, layers and layers of it. You can walk around with no thoughts and still at the pre-verbal level believe that you're a human being walking on planet Earth living in the 21st century. This is how reality is supposed to be. A wall is really a wall, a cup is just a cup. I'm watching a YouTube video in my room over here. You're in the screen somewhere over there in another part of the world. This video was recorded in the past and you're watching it in the quote unquote now in this time of the day. One is real life and one isn't. If you believe this to be absolutely true and the only way to experience reality, then you've already been indoctrinated to the cult of human convention, modernity, space-time causality, just to name a few. You can transcend them all while still being more human than human. There are views that make up what you assume reality is in relation to what you think you are that go completely unexamined or taken for granted.
Can I get a picture? You taking our picture?
Ignorance of how these views are formed is the reason why we cling on to certain modes of being, identities, worldviews, and experiences. One can become infinitely more spacious, blissful, and peaceful, walk around the formless jhanas, yet there's no realization because one hasn't fully realized how all these states and experiences, along with objects, the world, relationships, and informations, are compounded phenomenons. And that all compounded phenomenons are impermanent and without a self-essence. And because of this, we grasp onto it and find ways to sustain positive or neutral experiences and find remedies to relieve negative ones. Unless we understand the mechanism that gives rise to conditioned phenomenons, get to the root of how phenomena is compounded and formed, aka our root formation, which serve as foundations for our views, and the methods that we apply, whatever we use to measure signs of progress, any questions that we ask, and whatever answers we get are still coming from the same structure or the same formational pattern that got us into this samsaric situation in the first place. Just like how science uses matter to observe and measure matter to create more matter, but you never go beyond its own container. This is okay if your goal is to become a scientist, but if it's a realization that you're after, you have to investigate and invalidate all meaning-making systems, especially the ontological structure that's holding up your entire spiritual pursuit and personal development journey to break out of this endless cycle. We're conditioned to compress, compound, twist Buddha nature into distinct separated parts, like subject-object, past, future, present. We can call this process of phenomenons compounding formation. Even the formless jhanas are formations, therefore conditioned phenomenons. The difference between self and no self, formed and formless jhanas, dreams, waking life, and different psychedelic highs or lows are simply variations of phenomena compounding and decompounding, different patterns of formations, which leads to different geometries of being and presence, due to different causes and conditionings. Or the various configurations of the 5 aggregates, 5 fundamental elements that coalesce to make up a sentient being and its immediate experience, which are form, perception, feeling, consciousness, and formation. Formation aggregate is the glue that compresses and stitches together phenomenons. Some call this the fabrication aggregate, which applies not only to thoughts and emotions, but all conditioned phenomenons. Formation divides consciousness to create divided knowing of reality. Perception then discerns and discriminates. The world is split into fractals of names and forms with distinct boundaries. Then we react to and contract feelings into I like this, I don't like this, or neutral, giving birth to habitual tendencies that reinforces our conditioned becoming. Now, there's no formational pattern that is more or less real or more ultimate than any other, right? All is equally empty of inherent existence, including cessations. Mind in reality is constantly compressing and decompressing, shapeshifting and fluxing. What you truly are is the unconditioned that cannot be found and is beyond all condition, yet it is not apart from the conditions. Now you get into neither the same nor different territory. If the unborn is exactly the same as the born, then there will be nothing to realize. If the unmanifested is completely different from the manifested, then there will be no place for us to have the realization from, which means that the unconditioned is to be recognized through, with, and as the conditioned. It is through the starting condition of samsara and all of our obscurations and afflictions that we come to realize nirvana until you transcend both of these dualities. So root formations are patterns of compounding that are reinforced and conditioned over and over again through our different life circumstances, many of them formed in our childhood or before birth, becoming so dense that they serve as the fundamental basis for our entire existence and sense of survival, dictating every aspect of your life and the orientations of your becoming, both on a conscious and a subconscious level. So root formation is not a thing, because there are no nouns in the universe, only verbs. Some examples of root formation, if you want to pin them down to words, are I am special, I'm not good enough. I am a spiritual seeker, a human being, which rests on the formation of a self view. So there's nothing special about a self, right? It's just another formation. You can say it's the root formation of all root formations, but that's only because as a society, we demand separate self views to function and survive. These are underlying beliefs about a self. Other root formations have to do with unexamined assumptions about reality. Love will solve everything, or everything is consciousness. Time is real, just to name a few. Some root formations are so fundamental that it's hard to even formulate them with words. For example, believing that there is a one-to-one ratio between words and meanings, between meaning and representation, between representation and reality. So you see there are layers and layers and sub-layers of formations, all codependent arising and reinforcing each other. Each of these formations have their own codes in how they manifest the reality of your immediate experience through the 6 sense spheres of sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, and thoughts, also known as our sense-making structure, which then dictates how we create meanings to create conceit. Together, our sense and meaning-making structure instructs the mind to aggregate and compound phenomena to create views, which then influences the way we act, think, feel, perceive, behave, dress, and talk to form the basis of our identities and personalities. And all of the above codependently reinforce each other while looping back and further reinforce the way you make sense of things to create meanings, which further solidifies our root formations and reinforce our views, and on and on and on. Formation is the reason why we were born in the first place. We have already split, right? As incarnate beings, we're not just the product of formation, but we are the formation itself that continuously mate with forms to create more forms. Hence formation of not just making babies, but all the ways that we compound thoughts and grasp onto meanings to being inside my body, sitting on a chair, and all the ways that we conceive and experience reality. No wonder why the first noble truth is life is suffering. Most of us actually want to suffer because we just don't know any other ways to get out of this self-becoming cycle. So what to do? 2 words, rest and recognize. In a sense, when you see a view for what it is, it's no longer a view. The recognition of the compounded nature of phenomena and realizing the mechanism of how the mind constructs meaning and the insubstantiality of it all, you've already begun to uncover the unseen layers of mind information to de-escalate the karmic cycle and re-navigate your becoming. Exhaustions happen on its own accord. Reality doesn't need your help to compress and decompress, it's already contracting and expanding simultaneously. No need to dissolve anything because you can't out-dissolve creation. Any effort to let go creates more resistance. Let go of even letting go because anything that the self does to annihilate itself still belongs to the self. Resting is not the same as letting go or peace. Resting is the fitness to be with whatever is happening. Ultimately, rest and recognize merge as you disappear into the signless, non-local raw sentience that you've always been, infinitely large and infinitely small. So recognize not from the separate observer because any recognition done through the subject-object split creates more splits. You need a kind of a non-dual recognition that's beyond all reference points. Can you rest as the event horizon before consciousness begin to divide itself into the knower, the knowing, and the known, the conscious and the subconscious, and accept every part of this natural process of love, death, and creation? Without this meta-recognition and non-conceptual understanding, you can sit in samadhi, do self-inquiry, or do nothing meditation for decades and still get stuck because afflicted mind exists in neutral, negative, and positive states. Am I preferring or rejecting certain states of consciousness rather than seeing that there's just different configurations of the aggregates and that there are infinite numbers of ways that the mind can aggregate? Aversion to dark night of the soul or attachment to mystical highs, psychedelic experiences, or spaciousness even, is simply the way that people grasp onto or rareify a state of phenomena decompressing and mistaking that for the cause of their spiritual progress or lack of progress, and their view becomes I must always be spacious, high, or at peace. Instead of seeing how phenomena aren't compounding, it's just part of nature's ongoing cycle. And all the recognitions accumulate into Anatta realization, and you continue the process of purification while holding the right view until you reach completion, where there's no more distinction between the pure and the impure. Since there's nothing but the liberating view that is the nature of mind, all that is happening is view refinement and the purification of obscurations and afflictions, which at the most subtle level requires a tremendous amount of yogic power. It almost feels like you're tuning the deepest regions of the mind from ignorance to wisdom particle by particle. Do you have the curiosity to keep questioning the ways that you conceive over yourself and the world down to the most fundamental level? By going beyond the beyond, we reach the edge of our ontological and epistemological structure into the mystery over and over, as we cross the chasm between the known and the unknown, sense and senseless, while continuously breaking through fear barriers. Trust and aspiration is needed to let go of everything you can or are willing to know and whatever realizations you think you have. But be careful not to solidify the mystery either, because oh I can and I don't know anything view can yet be another non-dual trap that prevents you from further investigation. Carved out a time to do a little like solo retreat. Every day I come out with this sits. The known becomes the unknown becomes the known. I don't really feel human right now. I'm losing like interest in human affairs. Will, in the book club meeting the other day, he's like, when he talks to other people about enlightenment, just like Anatta or like non-dual awakening or whatever, people will freak out. But now we're talking about Buddhahood. He's like, he can't even find anybody who can be freaked out by it because it's like no words to describe this thing. It's so inconceivable.
Right now, to try to talk to him, it would just work his mind.
This stuff is just too out of the box, even for people who are Anatta realized, which leads me to non-dual myth number 6. Anatta realization, what most people in the modern Dharma or non-duality circle consider to be the end of the path or the holy grail, is actually only the starting condition for the rest of the journey. Number 5, you must kill the ego or annihilate the self. No self, emptiness, or even dependent origination are remedies. And whatever remedies that you use must be thrown away once cured. Because from the perspective of a clean shirt, both the stains and the detergents are obscurations. Ultimately, one needs a penetrating insight into what's beyond your current stance, into what transcends both the known and the unknown. And then seeing clearly over and over again what's always and already the case. That what you assume to be a snake has always been a rope. So unless you have this quantum shift, a clear recognition, whatever remedies that you use are still coming from the same starting condition that got you here in the first place. One of the visual analogies that I use to demonstrate this point is one of those optical illusion pictures, where if you look at it from one perspective, it's a duck. If you look at it from another perspective, it's a rabbit. The awakened being sees it from this side, and the unawakened being sees it from the other side. Better analogy is going beyond even the rabbit and the duck. It's seen that they're actually just inks on paper. But then there's also a tendency to verify that into a new stance. Like, oh, everything is sensation. Or, oh, this is God's infinite dream. Now, if you don't see the snake for what it is, even if you have an experience of no self, you're just replacing the mistaken image of the snake with a less poisonous snake or a cuter animal. The real insight is to see the lack of inherent existence in all phenomenons, self and no self included. So the conventional self can still arise to perform a certain function, but if your insight is mature enough, you're never again mistaking the snake for a rope. The real insight is to see that expansion, contraction, subject and object codependent rise simultaneously. Therefore, neither has an intrinsic existence. Then you have no preference for either, both, or neither. You're not trying to throw away the duck or the rabbit. You're actually training up your ability to see the rabbit and the duck and both of them simultaneously or separately, or seeing the paper and the ink all at the same time. Both with the one and the many, neither the one and the many kind of territory. And then you have a mature Anatta realization, which includes washing away the stink of your awakening. Realization is not even something that exists in time and space. It's not a thing that a person can obtain. That's already the wrong starting condition. Hey Frank! Anatta is a non-affirmative negation.
I'm so excited.
So in a sense, there is no such thing as Anatta.
Fake replica.
But when you take that ultimate statement and try to stuff it into your own view, then you end up bypassing with, oh, there's nothing to do, I don't need to practice. Can't tell at all.
It's so real.
Ultimately, there's nothing to dissolve, but at the same time, there is a process of purification. Can you hold both views simultaneously until they both collapse? Modern Dharma community, right? They rarefy realization.
Off-white.
They commoditize Anatta like the latest shiny gadget, like a gold medal or something. And you can see how the line of conceiving directly comes from the sense-making system of the 21st century modern mind. Now the rest of the path is seen through the emptiness of even the rope. See, all the countless webs of causal conditioning that gives rise to the rope are also empty, so it's rainbows all the way down, and this is the emptiness of others. Not just other people, but the world itself. Not just this world, but all cosmos and beyond. Paradoxically, this is where you can meet all sentient beings exactly where they are without the obscurations of your lens of projection. Nothing as an essence means everything is interpenetrating and dependent arising. Like you.
Yeah, hold the world. Good looking people.
One can permanently dissolve the center and perceives the world as a hologram perceptually, MTCP fourth path, or self-emptiness, but still haven't fully understood the emptiness of the world and of others. So he's still constrained by the world he imagines to be fundamentally real, including the intricacies of conventions and meaning-making systems. He's free from the belief that he is someone, but he's still bound to the construction of the word and the world, which can manifest as root formations that are yet to be examined. More on this later, but first let's explore non-dual dogma number 4, you're not supposed to feel desires or emotions after realization. There's a tendency for people to zombify themselves after Anatta because so-and-so say you're not supposed to feel emotions. So they bypass and suppress their feelings without knowing that not feeling anything is still a feeling, or they feel jaded, or when emotions do arise, they feel conflicted. The no-feels view is a Theravada invention. But from the Vajrayana and Dzogchen vehicle, emotions is path, creativity and expression is path. Actually, there is nothing that isn't the path. Emotions like anger, sadness, desire, and jealousy aren't viewed as negative, and it's naive to eliminate these emotions because they're powerful forces that serve their particular functions. The tantric move is to transmute these energy alchemically into different types of wisdom and creative expressions, and see that they are the very manifestation of the mirror-like wisdom of true nature. If you suppress or eradicate desire and feelings, you're missing out on the opportunity to transmute the most powerful force in existence into the fuel for transformation, to develop capacities, cities, and powers far beyond the earthly realm. You can desire without grasping.
You're beautiful.
Feeling just is the becoming itself. Real problem is the attachment, the grasping, the clinging to that process that creates a subject-object split. The flow of reality just a flow by itself, and then you're not apart from it. So you're not even observing it. It's like the observer merges with this flow. And then you see the nature of true desire with a capital D, or like true becoming. And then they're like, what's that? Well, what is the force of nature? One way to describe the force of nature is this force of becoming. Film the entire universe from the Big Bang to the Big Crunch, and then like make it a time lapse and put it in a museum. That would depict nature's becoming. There's a desire in there. Desire of creation, desire of, say, reproduction. That's why the sexual energy is sometimes like the object for tantric practice, because you tap it into your own energy that's closest to the universal energy of becoming, the divine desire that makes everything happen. Yeah, but then the moment you start grasping to identify with it, that's when the suffering is. If you disappear into the process of arising, passing, and decaying, then in a sense, that's true equanimity, because there is no separation reference point between arising or passing. That's why they say this insight is non-arising or non-ceasing, or like deathless, or like non-abiding. It's not like contraction expansions don't happen. It's just like there's no reference point to even make that distinction, or like preferring one over the other between contraction and expansion. You see that they're actually just contemplating rise and happening simultaneously. Things can arise and pass away, but it doesn't feel like it's arising and passing away. So part of seeing the emptiness of the world is seeing the emptiness of teleology and linear space-time causality. Even splitting yourself in time, oh, there's a secret in the present moment, and there's a path I have to travel, and if I do this or that technique for X amount of time, I'll have this or that result, and finally a future version of me will reach liberation. That's already creating a subject-object split in time. But that entire ontological structure is what prevents a realization to dawn. We're so conditioned to think that there's only one cause and one effect. How many times do we get upset because we think a person did something there? That's the reason why I'm angry over here, without seeing the greater mandala, that there are infinite webs of cause and condition at work for the creation of each moment. Our entire civilization and modern science is built upon the root formation of a linear causality and the structure of reductionism. And you and everything around you is a product of that very same matrix. No wonder why it's so difficult to see it. But just because it works, it doesn't make it ultimately real. And just like any self-sustaining matrix, the very structure that makes something work continuously serves its own illusion, and over time it solidifies into quote-unquote truth. And we apply it to everything we do in life, how we come up with solutions to problems in a step-by-step fashion, and how we measure progress linearly and orthogonally. This way of approaching isn't wrong. It works up to a certain point. But can you recognize when a particular paradigm has reached its edge so you can transcend to the next one? Instead of just thinking A is causing B, therefore I get C, what about from A to Z, and every letter in between is connected to every other letter, all happening in simultaneity? When you transcend the 3 times, you realize that reality unfolds causally and retrocausally, where the cause is in the effect and the effect is in the cause, where time can flow backward and forward and standing still, all the same timelessness. Then you realize it was never about going anywhere because nirvana is samsara. You transcend the alphabets altogether to reach the unconditioned, which is never apart from the conditioned, yet no conditions can touch it. And this is why we should pay homage to our afflictions and doubts and obscurations, because our very own conditioning is the fuel to go beyond. Causality is just one of the collective rule formations that governs the world. Now you're beginning to see how deep the matrix go. The reasons why people hold on to these unexamined views is because of survival and safety. We're social creatures who are wired to want to fit in. For our ancestors, being cast out of your tribe means death. So it takes a tremendous amount of power and courage to wake up because you're swimming against karmic streams that stretch back generations. Not to mention biological conditionings that are millions of years old. When people get into spirituality, even if you just read The Power of Now and it says, hey, you're not the mind, you're not the ego. If you bring that shit to like your workplace, even The Power of Now is considered like crazy talk. Layer by layer, you get rid of this rule formation, that rule formation. Oh, I came across a pragmatic dharma. Daniel Ingram said, even awareness is not the self. I'm pissing off all the previous rule formation people that I associate myself with. Even The Power of Now, there's no now. Now I'm in another camp. Oh, this is some next level shit. Consciousness is impermanent too. And then you go further and what do you mean fourth path is not the end? No, I can only talk to like 12 people about it. The transition from the bodybuilding day to spirituality was kind of like taking that container of the root formation and all the people that agree with me and saying like, no, I'm not the body anymore. The body's a hologram. And a lot of them freak out. They got really pissed off.
Waiting for me to save God.
Root formations are holding patterns that serve as foundations for views at the pre-verbal level. Ignorance, formation, and consciousness. The first 3 out of the 12 links of the dependent origination process codependent arise. This means that if you're ignorant of this process, just by being conscious, we're already predisposed to partial views and a divided knowing of reality. All of our experiences are filtered through the obscure lens, which looks back to further reinforce the root formations and on and on and on. Study the 12 links of dependent origination. Ultimately, if you replace ignorance with wisdom, the entire cycle reverts to liberation. Root formations are almost like blueprints that instructs the mind to composite experiences through the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, fabrication, and cognition. All 5 aggregates codependent arise to form the geometry that makes up our 6 sense spheres and the shape and structure of our being and presence, which is constantly contracting and expanding, shape-shifting, computing to create our immediate experience and to make sense of it. Now being unfolds us time, and presence expands us space. You hear people talk about the spaciousness of presence and the trajectory of our becoming due to the volition of time. Now space and time are not separate, which means being and presence are always one unity, making this geometric structure something like a 4-dimensional hyperspheroid. Time vibrates into space. The vibrational pattern of time is the shape of space in that particular block of space-time fabric, and we associate that with the present moment. But there are no distinct blocks of moments because everything is constantly fluxing and transforming. If you have the insight, this is actually a closer description of the nature of experience itself, what you are and what reality is, which is indifferentiable, than what you think you are while looking at yourself in the mirror. That's legit too, but that's just one particular geometry. One fractal that also contains a whole. Different geometry of the shape-shifting hypersphere, which arises from the different configurations of the aggregates, creates different worlds, views, different modes of being, different ontological structures, sense and meaning-making systems. Since all conditioned phenomena are impermanent and without a self-essence, there are infinite ways that reality can shapeshift. This is another way to perceive how emptiness is form and form is emptiness. Quote-unquote other sentient beings are the causes and conditioning that makes up different geometric time, space, mind, body pattern. Since there are no boundaries, these geometric structures interwoven and interpenetrate through, with, and as life streams, or karmic strings, to co-vibrate and create what we know as the quote-unquote universe. A multidimensional Indra's net that is neither one nor the many. Because ignorance is the first link in the starting condition of the dependent origination cycle that cascades the entire mess of suffering, it co-arises with formation to write blueprints that are obscure and afflicted. So the general geometry of sentient beings are uneven and asymmetrical. The stained blueprints boots up in an invisible dome that concaves inward, full of pressure points that manifest as localized contractions or pain in the body, the feeling of separation, anxiety, or even bliss. And the split that creates all dualities, light versus dark, natural versus supernatural, possible versus impossible, real versus unreal, self versus world. And everything quote-unquote inside the dome is the known, and everything outside quote-unquote is the unknown. The fear of the unknown makes it very difficult to penetrate through the walls of these domes. But when you recognize there was never a dome in the first place, you go beyond being and presence and transcend the 4 dimensions of space and time. Truth will be revealed when all meaning-making systems invalidate themselves, and then everything becomes meaningful and significant. The reason why root formations or core afflictions cannot be easily detected is by design. It's a building security system for any matrix to protect itself from destruction. This is why the process of peeling away the layers of the onion to discover the nature of mind and reality can feel like death. As one gets closer and closer to these root formations, it's common to have existential fears or go through ontological shocks, or even the experience of bliss is part of the self-protective device to sustain the bubble of its own illusion. When the knowns start to break down, when we take psychedelics or win our way to a cessation, the sense-making structure goes haywire, diffusing our usual way of making meaning. Phenomena begin to lose boundaries. As we cross the event horizon of the chasm between existence and non-existence, not even space, time, or consciousness can survive this black hole. Now you're getting closer to what you truly are. Whatever the self hangs on to be the base reality is seen through to be just another layer of fabrication. So working through the jhanas can train the mind to see the empty nature of all formations and letting them go layer by layer. Resting the 8th jhana, neither perception nor non-perception, allows you to come in contact with base formations before they're fully formed. So you can say cessation, the 9th jhana, is the most direct way to seize all formations, and a very important tool, but then there's a tendency to turn that into the ultimate, or cling on to annihilation. No different than taking emptiness, or any insights, or substantiate any special states into a view. You can go directly for cessations over and over, yet still be rebooting the same programs, unless you have the capacity to slow down the process and see the nuances of exactly how each layer of the fabrication is composited to construct your entire reality. Have the agility to catch the moment conceptual mapping comes online, immediately following the Buddha process to prevent further proliferation. Upon coming back from a cessation, immediately conceptuality kicks in. Oh, did I just had a cessation? What path am I on? No different than when we have a reaction, immediately we form a judgment for or against that reaction instead of simply accept or rest and recognize and keep going meta, meta, meta. So the ego will do anything in its power to sustain its own me-making system. In fact, there is no such thing as a quote-unquote ego except for a collection of sense and meaning-making systems, created out of social norms and agreements within the context of conventions, which is completely relative. When you go to the gym, base formation boots up a completely different dome than when you buy coffees at Starbucks or talk to strangers.
You're super beautiful. Yeah, what's your name?
Different views, costumes, and scripts, different modes of being and perceiving. If you fail to act and behave accordingly to the rules of engagement that governs each dome, you experience social anxiety and a sense of self is threatened. Worst case scenario, you put into the mental hospital or be killed. So there's nothing in society that isn't a cult. But if you can recognize how the mind aggregates, you can intentionally boot up different matrices, glide from one dome to another with complete fluidity and flexibility in how you manifest the geometry of being and presence. You can even map your aggregation to other people, feel exactly what they're feeling, and read their minds. But most of the time we're unaware that we're at the mercy of the concavities of these domes. Monks who renounce the world to join the monastery are actually buying into the same worldly conventions and buy from the opposite direction. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but true renunciation is going beyond all conventions, both the worldly and the unworldly, by convexing your dome outward. A renunciative mind recognizes and sees through to all conventions, and you realize that whatever you're trying to let go of or renounce is just another construct, and then you can fully engage through equality and dispassion. The modern spiritual marketplace have their own sets of sense and meaning-making structures. Realization itself can become its own rule formation. Views that are constructed around awakening can be the hardest to penetrate. The experience of non-dual awareness is so encompassing that it can prevent people from further investigations. You can be blinded by light the same way you're blinded by darkness. Unless you penetrate through the lack of inherency, even awareness itself, non-dual awareness can still be a dome, about a very large one, not to mention the stories of my awakening. You think you've woken up, but maybe you're just waking up to another matrix. All this explains why our minds are so desperate to try to make sense of everything by grasping onto the known existence, always assessing, discriminating, containing, defining, and twisting, compartmentalizing reality into boxes within boxes of names and forms, constantly craving for certainty, for safety and survival. In fact, this is what makes up a sentient being. We're compounded phenomenons that compounds phenomenons, chopping reality by slicing and dicing ourselves into smaller and smaller chunks and containers. We are war people who are very good at dividing and conquering nature in the name of reductionism with worldly success. This is why it's so hard to flip the script from ignorance to wisdom. Even the very basic sense of moment-to-moment experience is consciousness splitting itself into distinct chunks of time. When we apply mindfulness, our mind is constantly tracking from one moment to the next while dividing itself into the observer and the observed. But what consciousness is tracking isn't the present moment because there is none. It's simply tracking the projection or the appearance that is rooted in the formation of time is sequential. Then it continuously finds targets to confirm its own formation on the cycle go. Even the sense of dissatisfaction, that things should be just a little bit different than whatever is already happening, is rooted in the fear of the unknown. This is why we're so attached to our routines and our known model of how things ought to be, hence the need to be in control. So nothing that's been said here is intrinsically good or bad. The moment you conceive of anything to be right or wrong, you've already created a split and you fall right back into conceit. Now conceit isn't just arrogance, that's the conceit of the conceit. The moment you believe the body to be solid and a cup is just a cup, you're already conceited, bro. Now conceit and conceptuality serve their function in gluing together the collective dream. And it's beautiful, I love my iPhone. The problem isn't conceit per se, but the ignorance to how the entire situation come about, and the identification to our own conception, which is the source of all wars and conflicts. Now to extreme view number 3, everything is one. The law of one takes on many forms. Always God or the one mind, with the belief that science holds a monopoly for truth, are both the same conceit. Some people see through the awareness trap and then go on reify the human or the physical world by reducing everything down to sensations. Why only be one when you can be the many, the one, everything in between, and none of it? See, Reframing can only be truly perceived through the wisdom eye, and this is part of our bootcamp training, where we learn yogic maneuvers and routings, jhanic absorptions, and various other meditative equipoise to refine our views, purify mental obscurations through insights and realizations. Working with the aggregates and the elements of earth, water, air, fire, space, and time, we learn how the mind constructs reality and compounds phenomenons from the unfabricated to the mundane to the mystical and back again. Through book club meetings, we train up our yogic intellect to penetrate blind spots and prime our minds for tantric transmissions. Together we co-create a Buddha field, a silent signal that could be accessed everywhere and nowhere. Link in the description for podcasts or sign up for their next cohort and train together with me and our coach and our sangha every day for 90 days.
This system we're being introduced to for the purpose of recognizing nature of mind. Rather than starting off emphasizing specific techniques, we are establishing a model to the structure of mind, which is a structure of interconnected and interdependent processes. These are the elements, or the fundamental energies of experience, and how being aggregates or is constructed. These processes and their products, the content of ordinary everyday conscious experience, which we typically either take for granted or overlook altogether, are primarily concerned with sense-making. It's from this habitual orientation to sense-making that questions like, am I doing this right, arise. Rather than engaging with and focusing on the contents of this sense-making process, we're making direct contact with, in a non-conceptual way, meaning-making and meaning itself. Seeing how a snake or a rope is created, how meaning particularizes, rather than how we make sense of if it is a rope or a snake.
Instead of using content to cure content, we go meta to recognize the context of our sense and meaning-making structure through the nature of mind and then deploy the fitting techniques accordingly. We let the absorption and the process of purification happen all on their own as a byproduct of this metacognition. You can call this ontological training to ultimately erase the gap between content and context. Practice in life. 10,000 hours of practice in this and you get that, and finally reaching a goal as a seeker on a linear trajectory.
Telling people what to do because that was my path is completely misleading. From that level of linear cause and effect, it's not completely wrong, but it can be very limiting.
But at the same time, if I didn't put in the reps in the last 10 years, I wouldn't be in this new territory. But what if you can see the limitation of your views right now? See, the separated being is the affliction. So when it's trying to dissolve or cure more afflictions, it's just more twisting of the self-affirming cycle. Unless you recognize that's what's going on.
Woo, I'm so free. I have shifted to a more spacious bowl. Even when you jump into the non-dual spaciousness, you're still a fish. The conceit of humanness is still very much there. The humanness is not the problem. It's the unexamined and the clinging is the problem. The practice then becomes, can you recognize your own limit of that conception and effortlessly move to the next one? Say that Frank has another realization and he's describing his state. You just envision another fishbowl and you jump into that. You say, is this it, Frank? Relying on an external validation for its own view, but you can't get it. So it then really becomes like a level of contemplative fitness has not reached yet for this answer to land. What is the level of comfort you can have while falling into the unknown? So then when you get pointed out the nature of mind, you have a foundation for that insight to land on.
When I hit the Anatta, it was both I was in a very high state of absorption, extremely spacious and blissful. But when everything clicked, it was an inquiry question, who wants to get enlightened? And that was the first time I realized whatever was perceiving life this entire time wasn't human, but luminous primordial sentience. So it was the convergence of all the yogic training and the recognition of the nature of mind that led to the realization. When you merge the panoramic view of space with the panoramic becoming of time, you become a hyperspherical donut to enter a completely inconceivable territory where all dimensions are stacked into a singularity. This is where we're receiving the atemporal tantric transmissions from. This is actually the same mechanism behind deity yoga. Since it can be difficult to see your own blind spots, you embody deities from higher planes to do the purification.
The desire to create this arises because there's people calling for it. There's like, we want to know this.
That's why I turn this camera on and then we manifest this together.
Non-dual myth number 2, you lose motivation after realization. There's also a tendency to be lazy and unproductive because you hold on to the extreme view that there's nobody here doing anything. When aspiration, rather than personal motivation, takes over, productivity level, physical conditioning, and mental processing power increases exponentially because the mind frees up a tremendous amount of energy previously wasted on maintaining illusions. For Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, performance is key. Developing human capacity and beyond becomes part of a path that sees no distinction between the personal and the divine will.
And the desire for the universe to know itself, and then you get the signal. It's like a signal like everybody sends, and then you recognize it, and it's like, oh, somebody sends the signal, and it arises as a desire. So then you pick up the desire, and then
It's the
creation
desire for
happens.
becoming.
Yeah, it's a creation happening.
Last but not least, thinking making money is bad because there's still a distinction between the spiritual and the material. Making money can be a dharma to find ethical, skillful, and compassionate ways to relate to the samsaric existence and to purify conditions through the conditionings. Money is imagined just like everything else.
But the process of making money is a type of transmission, a creative energy exchange. And the client invests his energy during the work to acquire the money he pays me with, which is determined by what he thinks my value is and how much energy I can generate. He then stores that energy in a physical or non-physical form, which we call money, and if the client is satisfied with the product or service, co-creation happens. You can continue to enhance this energy exchange by investing wisely through non-grasping and follow nature's course of the least resistance.
We're just receiving signal while at the same time giving off signals.
True telepathy. Even if the words from the seeming body, vessel, communicator, which it is, it's a vehicle for communication, doesn't match the telepathy because it's dissolving something or it's using the barrier of language, what you or everybody else receives is the signal.
It's not like there's an individual generating the signal.
The individual is also the signal too.